This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and my special guest today is Deb Lavoy. Deb, Deb is an award-winning social business columnist at cmswire.com who helps organizations build powerful narratives that move markets and galvanize teams. She has studied the workings of highly functioning teams and organizations for nearly 15 years. Her career began in engineering and over time moved closer to the customer in order to discover true need, design outstanding solutions, and bring them stunningly to market. She founded a company called Narrative Builders, which is a consultancy that builds narratives that convey the power of your business, product, or ideas. And we're delighted to have you on the podcast. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you very much, Kelly.
All right. And as you know, we start our little interviews off here with a couple of quirky questions to get to know a little more about the folks we're interviewing. And my first question to you is, tell us what your guilty pleasure television show is.
Oh, Project Runway.
No way.
I love watching those people strive to figure it out every week, and they're really trying hard, and I like to watch that.
Very cool, very cool. Well, and it's almost like watching art being made, don't you think?
I do. It's we're always sort of struggling with our inner sort of anxieties and potential, and you get to sort of see that drama played out every week on that show with a bunch of different people. And, of course, they spice it up. And there's clothes.
How can we go wrong?
Go wrong.
Very cool, very cool. All right, my second quirky question is, what is your favorite possession?
My favorite possession. Well, I have a lot of favorite possessions. My children give me things. My other loved ones give me things. My husband's giving me things. But the thing I probably really can't live without, I have to say, is my coffee pot.
Do you have like a coffee addiction issue here or something?
You could say that. You could say
that. All right.
Coffee operated, that's for sure.
Okay, well, nobody take her coffee pot away from her. Okay.
My coffee pot.
Excellent, excellent. All right, whoops, I'm going to tilt my screen a little bit here. There we go. Okay. Now let's move into something a little more serious, and then we'll dive more into what I think you can share with us today that'll bring a lot of value to our listeners. And the first question is, what's your story? How did you become interested in narrative, and how that has an impact on business?
That's a really interesting question. So, I started my career as an engineer.
Whoops.
I started my career as an engineer, and I have always, ever since then, been interested in not only solving problems cleverly, but ensuring that they actually solve problems that meant something to people. And so I, ended up in product management, product marketing, strategic marketing, brand marketing, and very often what happens, and probably many of your listeners will recognize this, is that you end up in a room full of people where you're talking about, you're trying to figure out how you're going to market the product. And so you first try to come up with your value proposition, right? And so everybody's sitting in their room and everybody's talking, and they're all talking about different things. And they're all right. And they don't really have any meaningful way to make sense of the various things they're talking about. So it ends up being sort of a matter of opinion. And with any luck, the group sits together and, hashes this out a bit, and they come up with something that they like. But again, it's a matter of opinion. So I was really interested in whether we could think about narratives more formally, if we could understand, what are the different elements of a complete narrative, from the visionary through the sort of intellectual and philosophical, through the details and the minutia that make it real, right? So I wanted to understand how we could take all the ideas that people had and give them a place to sit so that we could look at them as a whole and refine them. On the other side, I've always been interested in looking at how some narratives take over, and people believe them, and people use them to filter the realities and the facts and the situations and events of life. And I wanted to see if we could, on the one hand, build these really powerfully complete, meaningful narratives, and on the other hand, get people to adopt them as their own, get people to see the world the way we do. And if you can do that, of course, as a marketer, that's an incredibly powerful thing, but also internal to the organization. If you work in an organization that is complicated enough, either because it's large or because it's working on hard problems, you'll find that very quickly people start to diverge on their interpretations of what they're trying to achieve. And if you have a clear, thoughtful, well-structured narrative, it can really be catalytic in getting teams to achieve great things, to make more meaningful product decisions. I can't tell you how many times I've worked at companies where they decide to do things and it ends up being either a matter of opinion or just totally random. A narratively focused organization will make product decisions and business decisions that make sense, and the people who work for those companies are striving together toward those goals.
So
that's a long answer.
Well, so can you define narrative, how you define narrative as opposed to a brand story or something like that?
Yeah, so I've put a lot of thought into that question. And I have a couple of different answers. At the highest level, a narrative is a system of beliefs that you can use to interpret the meaning of things. In terms of the structure of an organizational narrative, I think it needs to have at least 4 components to it. One is the big why, the big vision, right? What is the impact you hope to have in the world? What is the big change? What is the big important idea and emotion that you're trying to create? That's generally where you'll make an emotional connection with your audience. The next element is what I call the how, right? What is your approach? What is your methodology? What is your point of view? That's going to enable you to make progress against that vision. This is usually the most meaningful differentiator for most organizations. The next thing is what I call the offer or the ask. So this is, really, what is it that you are offering now? What is your product exactly? What does it do? How does it deliver against that approach to deliver against that vision? You would be amazed how many organizations that I work with that never clearly articulate what they're selling, asking for. So, in sometimes in governmental organizations or NGOs, they're not really selling anything, but they're making an ask or they're making an offer, and it's stunning to me, although it shouldn't be at this point. Really, the majority of them miss the mark on that. And then the fourth element is proof. So what are the elements of proof, whether it's data or testimonials or third-party, analysts that lend credibility to what you say, that give me confidence that what you're saying makes sense. So those are the 4 elements: the why, the how, the ask, and the proof.
And so for the leaders that are listening to this podcast, how do they use those 4 elements to help align their team with the bigger picture, get them on the same page?
Well, there's a couple of different ways that I think are really helpful. First of all, when you get into the room with your 8 smart people who all have very heartfelt ideas about what it is you're doing, and they all start talking at once, and Joe's talking about saving the world, and Jill's talking about the fact that, yeah, but our feature is, runs at 78 miles per hour, and theirs only runs at 74. And and somebody else is saying, yes, but ours is accredited by the American Plutonium Society or whatever it is. The first thing that those 4 elements do is give you a place to put all of those ideas. Right? So instead of having an unstructured brainstorm, you're having a more you can elicit everybody's ideas, put them into buckets, and then work with those buckets to refine the story together. And when you do this, particularly if you do this in a participatory way, what happens is people buy into it. So whether these are your marketing people or your sales people or your product development people or your customer service people, everyone in your organization has a stake in this. And, if you do this thoughtfully enough, if you have a good narrative, people can sort of organically adopt it as their own, and they can talk about it in a way that is consistent without having it be memorized. Mm-hmm. It becomes part of how they think. So, and it as a result, it aligns the way people are thinking. So as you're collaborating on various projects, as you are working together as a team, as you're trying to solve problems, the way you're interpreting events is aligned so that you can work more effectively together.
So how did you come to be so passionate about this issue? Did you notice this happen in one of your organizations, or was it kind of an inspiration, a journey for you, or how did you come to this place?
It's interesting. I first started working on what I called the narrative hierarchy a really long time ago, about 15, 16, 17 years ago. And I was working at a high-tech company, and they were doing something that was very cool. But sales and marketing were really angry with one another. It wasn't just that there was tension, they were angry because the salespeople were having a very hard time articulating what it was they sold, and marketing was having a hard time with it. And I was a consultant. I was consulting for them. They'd brought me in to write a couple of white papers or something. And I just started putting up on the board. So where do we agree? Right? And I think it's very important to keep elevating the conversation where people get it. So that was sort of the first time I started consciously and explicitly thinking about this. But then each company I went to, and I worked for, I was living in Silicon Valley. I worked for a lot of technology companies, some itty bitty ones, some massive behemoths. And they all seem to have this challenge in common, which is that after they got past an initial group of really only around 6 or 7 people, it became really hard for them to explain the essence of what they did. Most companies sort of take it for granted that everybody knows. And I think that this is a big mistake, because it is this core understanding of the organization that allows you to create a cohesive team. It allows you to talk effectively to the market. It allows you to talk effectively to investors, to customers. But most often, what it really does is it helps you bridge those gaps between development and marketing, between customer service and seemingly everyone. Those guys are always the end of the road. Between quality assurance and development, between sales and marketing, it helps all of those teams have something in common that is meaningful to them.
And I wonder, in listening to you about this, I wonder if a lot of organizations focus on, the here's our offer, here's the product that we sell, and don't really get to the why piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Simon Sinek's "Start with Why" was a very brilliant few minutes, and the book was good too. And I think more companies are conscious of it. The problem is that why isn't quite enough, right? So why is a very good place to start, but because we're going to change the world is admirable and it's noble, but there can be a billion different ways to change the world. So we need to take that down a level, right? So what is your point of view? What is your approach? How are you going to change the world? Are you going to make different kinds of frozen dinners? Are you going to make umbrellas that turn into, solar cells? Are you going? And I'm being a little bit. One of the things I'm thinking about is years ago I worked for AOL, and this was when AOL was still in its heyday, and there was a point where there was so much energy and there was so much going on and it was so exciting, but at the same time it was clear that there was no unifying principle as to what people doing, what people were building. And I wrote this really snarky fake business plan for AOL frozen dinners. And I made it, I did it in the same way that people had, they were going to be internet dinners. But the point I was trying to make was, are we merely trying to sell anything that will generate revenue, or are we actually trying to accomplish something specific that will also generate revenue? I think the big why is important. I think the mission statement is important, but aligning around how your organization specifically is going to make progress against that, and then understanding your own product. I can't even tell you how many technology companies I have worked with where few people had any meaningful understanding about what their product really did and how it worked. And then, of course, the validating information that comes in from all around. Those are all important parts of the narrative. Another thing I want to say about narrative is that some people talk about narrative and story. A lot of people talking about storytelling. And storytelling is extremely important, but if you're a company of any size or an organization of any size, you have a lot of different stories that you need to tell, and you will have different stories as you evolve over time. But those stories should have something in common. You have a story to tell to your market, to your customers, to your employees, to your investors. You might have different stories for different products, for different markets, for different teams, but those stories should all be rooted in a master narrative. And you can have you can have a hierarchy of narratives, but they have to feel cohesive and married together somehow. And I think that once you do that, you have created an organization that has a true connection throughout the organization and has a level of resilience so that they can meaningfully respond and interpret events as they occur, change.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that you probably work with fairly senior levels of people in an organization when you're helping them with defining their narrative. But what would you recommend to that middle manager maybe who hasn't really understood what the narrative is, but feels like they need to understand for themselves and keep their employees moving in the right direction and motivated and doing what the company needs them to do?
Well, I think that anyone has the opportunity, particularly a manager, has the opportunity to build the narrative for their team. In a perfect world, you'll be building that based on the narrative of your organization. In a slightly imperfect but still pretty good world, you can share your narrative with your management, and they will appreciate that, and it will help your team to connect more meaningfully with other teams. You'll be able to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it in such a way that they will be more likely to get on board with you. And it's not the problem with it, in the absence of a meaningful narrative or other kinds of decision-making criteria, you end up in this situation where it's so often a matter of opinion. And once it's a matter of opinion, then it's political.
Right.
And then collaboration starts to break down. There are many organizations that transcend this, but this is where that stuff happens, right? We're having a discussion, we're trying to figure something out. We both have the best of intentions, but we have different criteria that we're working off of. We have different opinions of what will get it done. Unless we have previously agreed to a shared set of principles, sometimes you can get to a place where you have proof, right? Maybe you're an engineering company and you can objectively identify that one solution is better than another. But most of the time, even when you have proof, it's inconclusive. And you can have lots of different kinds of proof.
Right.
So you have to make decisions together, and you want it to you don't want it to live in that, my opinion versus your opinion. You want it to have a strong backbone of narrative that you're making those decisions against.
So to help make this clearer for folks, or to put their hands on it a little more, can you give an example of a narrative maybe that we're all more familiar with, or maybe if you're able to share a narrative of a particular client or something to help make it more tangible, and how that narrative makes a difference in the organization for the leaders and for the employees?
Sure. I can talk about a few of these things. Well, I'll talk about one that everybody knows about, which is Nike. Nike is a profoundly narrative-oriented brand. They're brilliant at it. But it's not, everybody knows their incredibly inspirational ads. Everybody knows their, just do it tagline. But if you actually go and look at their mission statement, and some of the other, I've studied that company quite a lot. One of their founding principles is this notion that if you have a body, you are an athlete.
Oh.
And they go on to say that, their job is to make clothes and equipment to, empower that athlete in you. But that statement, if you have a body, you are an athlete, is a very powerful statement. And when you think about that, and you think about the sneaker they recently released that you can tie without your hands, they're for people with disabilities.
Wow.
That is a profoundly would they have made those sneakers if that hadn't been their narrative? And because that is their narrative, it is almost seems like it's their responsibility to make those sneakers, right?
Yeah. I love that. That's a great example.
It's meaningful to me. Furthermore, I can talk about a couple of other examples. Some of my clients, I haven't quite cleared this with them, but another company that I happen to like, I like the way they think of themselves. Little company called Sugru. I think they're in Europe. Sugru makes a silicone putty. It's not unlike a million things you'd see in the hardware store. You get a tub of it for, $9.95, and you go fix something, whatever, with it. But Sugru was made by, well, it has some differences, but they're not important from what's in the hardware store. What's important about Sugru is that their founder decided that everyday people should be able to fix things and should be able to create things and customize things for themselves. The founder felt that that everyone should be a maker, not just people with special skills, not people with tons of time on their hands, but anyone who wants to do something should be able to. And so this was her way of democratizing, the maker movement. And it's a cool product, and I've given it as gifts a lot of times. People love this stuff. But one of the ways their narrative affects their product, they keep coming out with cooler and cooler color lines, right? So if they were just a hardware store item, it would come in gray and black and beige, right? But it comes in all of these wild, fun colors because it wants to be it wants to inspire people to make things and to fix things. Now they have a great tagline. Their tagline is "Fix That Thing," but that tagline is not enough to really flesh out and really influence their product decisions, right? And so when their team gets together and says, "Okay, what are we going to do next?" They aren't thinking about, "Okay, putty," right? "Okay, putty, fix things." They're thinking about how do we inspire people who don't necessarily have any special skills to be makers, and how do we make people proud of. I mean, when have you ever felt proud to own putty? Right? But I totally do. I love giving this thing as a gift, and I print out their manifesto every time I do because I want people to understand that this isn't just putty; it's makerdom. It's a cool, it's, and these are some of the ways that having a more complete narrative really influences. I mean, I can get into, some other examples too, but that's probably enough for now.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a great way to get our fingers around it and understand it better. Putty or no putty?
Putty or no putty?
All right. Well, I was going to look at my list of things here. We talked about several different things, but
I'm a rambler. Sorry about that.
No, that's perfect. It's been perfect. Let's see. I think I'll go. I think I'll go here next. I know that you worked for some social companies that had social type software, and that you provided to the marketplace so that they could use it to communicate and collaborate. So, what are some of the keys there that you found in working in those kind of organizations? They need to understand their narrative, but the collaboration piece. What are some of the key things that you saw there that once they understood their narrative really helped people work together better?
So there is nothing more awesome than a great team, right? When you are part of a great team, you have superpowers, right? A great team amplifies everyone's strengths and diminishes everyone's weaknesses and fires one another up. It has esprit de corps. You can do anything when you're part of a great team. And I, like most people, had the opportunity to be on some great teams and then on some crummy teams. And I was really driven to try to understand what the difference is between these teams, right? Why are some teams just awful? You can't do anything. And some teams just magical and you can do anything. And I'm not the only person to have ever asked this question.
No, right.
What's really interesting is that there's a fair bit of research that's been coming out lately. There was an article in Science that was published in Science, the journal Science, 3 or 4 years ago. And the weirdest thing, they were studying this, and they came up with a very unexpected result. And the result, what they found was that smarter teams had women on them. And they thought, that's weird. That was not what they were looking for was not what they expected. So they asked some other questions, which you should do when you get an unexpected result, right? And they discovered that really the thing was how equally people communicated. And that the presence of women tended to raise the overall, what they called emotional IQ of the team. Not strictly, but tended to. And then in those situations, you had more equal communication. Interestingly, extremely interestingly, Google recently, there was an article published about this in the New York Times in the Sunday Times about a month or two ago.
Yeah, I saw that one.
They approached the research from a totally different point of view. And they were, they're very metrics driven. They measure everything, right? And they figured we measure everything. We can measure how to predict a great team. And they measured every dimension of everything, crazy things, leadership styles, interests. Do they socialize outside of work? Do they have different Myers-Briggs? Do they have different skills or similar skills? Do they have balancing skills? And they found out, ultimately they discovered that the only thing that they had in common was, again, this egalitarianism in terms of how much each team member spoke. Not just contributed, how much they spoke. Or, did sometimes digitally, but how much they were communicating. And the teams that communicated more equally really were able to leverage their collective intelligence much better than the others. And this was, this accounted for IQs and everything else. That wasn't it. It was how well people communicated and how equally people communicated. I think that there's 3 critical things to understand when you're managing teams. One is this notion that communication is important. And if you don't have the right communication tools, you are going to struggle. And so it was a joy to be able to work on tools that really enabled people to communicate more effectively and more richly. The second thing is that teams need a shared sense of mission. And that's, where this whole narrative stuff comes into it. 3, teams really need a common operating picture. If you are working with a team and, you each have a different pile of resources that you're wading through and issues that you're wading through, and you can't quite keep track of what's going on, what are the decisions that are going to be made. It's just hard. And what really great team software does is not only facilitate great communication, not only facilitate these closer relationships, but they create a common operating picture that teams can use to just, so they don't always have to be spending their time and energy and passion wading through minutia, right? You can just get that up. You can context swap more easily. You can get back into the conversation. You can make sure you're having the same conversation. So those were a few of the things that made it great to work on that kind of software. The other was just the enormous pleasure and honor of working with hundreds of teams and getting to see how they work and how they learn, and learning from each of those teams, and trying to bring back a little bit of that magic that every good team will teach you, and help others capture it. It was a pretty great adventure.
Very cool. Are there any 1 or 2 lessons that really stick with you that you learned from one of those teams?
The teams that are amazing are people who have tremendous respect for one another and tremendous trust. So when there's a problem, there's no blame game going on. There's not like, how did you screw that up?
Right.
There's, what went wrong and how do we fix it? And, we're a team. It's not, there's no, those teams don't have insecurities, right? They make one another feel good rather than bad, right? And I think that any team that has those anxieties and those mistrusts going on, that's the problem you need to fix. Is to learn how you can really meaningfully trust one another. The other problems are relatively simple.
Nice, very cool. Well, as you reflect back over this journey and where you've come, with the teams and the collaboration and the building of the narrative, what are some of the pleasant surprises that you've come across along the way?
I think the thing that, we've all worked with people who we didn't like that much. But I think that the most pleasant surprise, I don't know that it's so much a surprise, but there are always great people who want to help you. And there's always a great person who needs a little help. And if you can remember to set your own anxieties aside, you really can do great things with other people, and they want to. And when you find those people that you can connect with at that realm, it's creative, it's productive, it's awesome. And I have been, on the one hand, I think I've been incredibly lucky to work with the people I've worked with. On the other hand, I think those people are there when you look for them. And so I'm tremendously grateful for the people I've worked with, who I've believed in, who've believed in me, who I've learned so much from, who have been patient with me and have helped me do things that I never thought I could do. At the same time, I'm confident that if you look around, you will find those people. People want that relationship.
Yeah.
You just have to let it happen.
Beautiful. Excellent. Well, we've talked about a lot of things. Before we sign off, is there anything else that you'd like to contribute to the cause to encourage managers and leaders out there?
There are none of us that are perfect. And we all do, we all screw things up. And that is actually a source of strength if you're willing to look at it that way. If you need to be absolutely perfect, if you need to never have made a mistake as a leader, that's a very, very hard and constricting life to lead. If you can trust your team to want to do the right thing, if you can encourage them to keep that perspective and that point of view, if you can reach out to them when you are stuck, think about the great leaders that you know. Think about the leaders that have made a difference for you. In general, they're not the rigid, anxious perfectionists. They're the ones that are willing to embrace the good, the bad, and the ugly, and always move it towards something positive.
Very good. Well, this has been excellent. Thank you so much, Deb, for joining us, and wish you all the best, and we look forward to hearing your narratives in the future.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's great.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, Online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.